Well, hello and welcome to Creator Toolbox. This is the show where we take ServiceNow developers and admins and show them the great tools to put in their toolbox, hence the name Creator Toolbox. My name is Chuck Tomasi. I'm a senior developer advocate at ServiceNow. Been here since 2010, customer for a couple of years before that, and a long, long history. Let's go into the rest of our intros and then we'll come back to the content. Real quick, go over there, Earl.
Hi, everyone. My name is Earl Duque. I am a senior developer advocate here at ServiceNow. I'm 3 years into being here at ServiceNow, but before that, I was like 4 or 5 years doing development at ServiceNow customers, mostly in higher ed. And then I'll pass it over to Patrick.
Hey, everybody. My name's Patrick Wilson. I'm an engineering director here at ServiceNow. Been here for 10 years, a little over 10 years now. Worked on a lot of stuff in that time, service portal, UI builder, UX framework, general UI stuff. Super excited to be helping to lead our dev tooling initiative here now.
Hey folks, I'm Jay Couture. I am Patrick's product counterpart over our developer experience and pro dev tooling. I've been at ServiceNow for a little over a year now, and we are super thrilled to be here to show you some of the new tooling that is coming out that you're going to be using, hopefully, and we're excited.
Yes, we are excited for this. It is part of our Xanadu release, logo and pointing. There it is. You can find this and the rest of our upcoming content as we record this. Perhaps you're watching this later. You'll find everything at our content calendar at devlink.sn/Xanadu. We make it simple so we can remember it, so you can remember it. That's the way it goes. All right. Enough of the intros and the housekeeping. I'm going to turn it over to Jay. Tell us what we're doing today.
Thanks, Chuck. So we're going to be talking about some of the awesome stuff that's come out as part of Xanadu and is available right now as part of early availability. So we launched some really, really exciting tooling, and we'll be giving a demo today of a few things. So first, we've got the ServiceNow Integrated Development Environment, or ServiceNow IDE. We've also got a really big update to the ServiceNow Software Development Kit. And as part of that SDK, we have ServiceNow Fluent. So we'll go into detail on a bunch of these things, but a quick plug, the ServiceNow IDE is available on the ServiceNow store for instances that have upgraded to Xanadu early availability. And if you search the ServiceNow IDE in the store, this will come right up. There is no license or cost associated to it. You can get it and install it right on your instance. The other thing to quickly note here is the ServiceNow SDK. This is available on NPM, or Node Package Manager. Version 2 of the SDK came out about 7 days ago, and there are installation instructions here. Patrick will go into more depth on the SDK and ServiceNow Fluent. So let's take a look at the ServiceNow IDE. This is essentially Visual Studio Code IDE, a very, very popular IDE for doing JavaScript development. And what we've done is we've taken Visual Studio Code and we've put it on a ServiceNow instance. This is my kind of internal testing instance. And we see it's running on the ServiceNow platform. This is our ServiceNow IDE logo. And I'm greeted with this, hi, welcome to the ServiceNow IDE page.
Jay, can we make that a little bigger? The font size a little bigger?
I can try.
A nice high resolution screen.
Is this any better?
Yes.
Excellent. Thanks, Chuck.
That's great.
So what I want to go through today is really the getting started experience. How do I get started with the ServiceNow IDE? I've just installed it. I want to try it out and see what I can do. So when I come into the ServiceNow IDE, the first thing that I want to do is create a workspace. So I'll click this Create a Workspace button. The alternative thing that I can do here is I can use the VS Code hotkey. On Mac, it's Command-Shift-P to open the command palette. On Windows, I believe it's Control-Shift-P.
We have hotkeys.
So I can type in, we do have hotkeys. I can type in Workspace and create a workspace, or I can just click this Create a Workspace button and do the same thing. So let's create a brand new workspace for us. let's call it Toolbox Demo. So I've got my Toolbox Demo workspace. Let's make our first app as my description. So we created this workspace, and now I'm in my empty workspace. I get some cool tips here on exactly that hotkey and some of the other useful hotkeys that come packaged in as part of VS Code on my instance here. And I'm given these call to actions. So I want to create an application. Let's do that. Let's create our first application. Let's call it Toolbox Demo. So this is our Toolbox Demo app. And let's say we want to make a to-do list application. And let's spell things correctly. So we will prefix your application with the required part of the scope here, x_snc, and then Toolbox Demo. So this will be the scope name for the app that I'm creating. And it's going to ask me for package name. This is in case I want to push this to, say, my internal NPM registry or even the public NPM registry so that I can reference it as a dependency. And we'll get a little bit more into that a bit later.
So a workspace can contain multiple scopes and packages. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chuck. It certainly can.
Is there a best practice about one-to-one, or doesn't matter, or put your packages with their dependencies? Any thoughts or recommendations on that?
So the recommendation that we have is a one-to-one relationship with applications and scopes and Git repositories, as a matter of fact. So it makes sense to have one application tied to one repo, and then all of the applications that I have as their own folder in our workspace here. And actually, to kind of demonstrate this, I'll create another application.
Okay.
We'll just call this application2 demo, demo. And once I've got this second application, you'll see a second folder pop up with that application. It takes a second to actually bootstrap all of the pieces of my application being installed here in my workspace. And we see this application2 demo. And Chuck, one of the really cool things, I'm glad you asked this, is when I have these two different app scopes, so these folders here, app2 demo and toolbox demo, are separate app scopes. I don't have to use the scope switcher here to switch between them. If I open up a file in either of these applications, we'll automatically switch that scope for you. And you can start working on stuff in that scope, and I can hop back and forth really easily for that nice frictionless experience of collecting all of the applications that I want to work on in the same time in my workspace and getting that work done really quickly. So that's super cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the actual structure of this application. So now that I've kind of bootstrapped this Toolbox demo application, we see a few folders here. This .now folder, folders that are prefixed with a dot are kind of suggested to be hidden, meaning that I shouldn't necessarily change anything within them unless I really know what I'm doing here. And this just has some information about some of the dependencies and how this gets deployed within my instance. We've got this, what should be a .metadata folder, will be, that will contain all of the XML files as part of my application and dictionary updates. Again, once I actually build up this application, this will populate for me, something that I shouldn't really modify because the purpose of the ServiceNow IDE is to modify readable code with our brand new programming language, our domain-specific language called ServiceNow Fluent. But just to show that this application still has all of the pieces of a classic ServiceNow application, we just added this abstraction layer on top of it to make it easier to write applications in code. So we'll come back to that in a little bit. I've also got my node modules here, which one of the cool things that I can do is actually take advantage of JavaScript modules within my ServiceNow applications. And Patrick will go into a lot more detail on this. I will sort of touch on it, but we'll take another look once I actually build up this application. So the main thing that I will want to be interacting with here is the source folder, and this looks similar to the structure of a Node.js application. So within my source folder, I've got a Fluent file and a folder and a server folder. So within my Fluent folder, I've got sort of the bare bones of a ServiceNow application. And since I'm kind of working on my getting started experience here, I'm going to point folks to our documentation. This is the Xanadu documentation for the ServiceNow Fluent domain-specific language. And the really cool thing about ServiceNow Fluent is that it is based on TypeScript. It is a declarative subset of TypeScript. And the way that I think about it is it's kind of like strongly typed JSON for defining my application metadata as code. And I'll explain a little bit more what this means when we actually do it. But if I want to get some information about what types of metadata within my application that I can write in code, kind of the magic incantations, I can find this here in our documentation. So from the ServiceNow Fluent page, let's copy in kind of this first block of code. So what this is going to do here in my application is create a few things. It's going to create a client script, a business rule, and a table. So when I copy in this code, I'll just kind of walk through it quickly. What we're doing is we're importing from the ServiceNow SDK, which Patrick is going to give a demo of that. But with the ServiceNow IDE, we've kind of packaged up and run a service that does all of the same functionality as the SDK in a service. And when I call out to it with this build button down here, which is something that we'll do shortly, I get access to all the functionality within the SDK, including the compilation of my Fluent code. And from the ServiceNow SDK, I'm importing the business rule API, client script API, the table API, and then a couple of types of columns so that I can actually define these things in code in my application. And we see some red squigglies here telling me, hey, you don't have this example to-do scope going on. So what I have to do is fix this so that it accords with the scope that I've created. So that scope was toolbox demo, and then we'll call this to-do table. And I'm going to come down and do the same thing for my client script, toolbox demo, to-do table. And I have to fix it up here as well so that my scopes accord with the scope in which I'm working. So toolbox demo, to-do table, and one more. We'll just kind of copy and paste here to make things a little bit easier within the business rule that I am defining. And the other thing to note here is that I get a little bit of an explanation as part of this kind of sample code that's ready and available for you. And for the other types of metadata, if I come back to our documentation, we can see I can define all kinds of metadata with ServiceNow Fluent. If I want to click into any of these, I can see some example code that I can use, like being able to define an ATF test as code, automated test framework. That's really, really cool. And I see exactly what the parameters that I need to pass are for defining that ATF test. So that gives me a little bit of information about how to actually use these things. And let's actually build up our application here. So now that I've kind of fixed any of the errors that are surfaced to me, what I want to do is, now that I've kind of written this code, I want to see it on my instance. And the way that I do that is I click this build button. So by running a build with the ServiceNow SDK build service, what we're doing is we're packaging up this application, we're sending it over, we're compiling it and translating it to a format that is readable by the instance, which notably is XML. And we see some output here.
Jay, sorry to cut you off. I think you have to save your file real quick.
Excellent idea. Thank you, Patrick.
Sweet.
Save early, save often.
Save early, save
That's
often.
right. And I do that with a Control S. Thank you for that note.
Yeah, no problem.
So as I build this application, I get some output here from the SDK itself telling me that, okay, we've actually output some of the cool stuff that you wanted to have in your instance within this metadata folder with the sysapp here and some of the node modules packaged up. And I want to actually test and make sure that what I've built here is working. So what I can do is I can come over to this extension, the Metadata Explorer extension, and drop down this Toolbox demo app. And I see some categories of metadata that I've created here. And let's say I want to look at that table that I've created, this to-do table. So let's open this up and let's search for that table that I created. in table builder here, toolbox demo to-do table. So if we open this up, I can actually change my scope here so that I'm in the right scope. The toolbox demo scope, let's apply that. And I can add a column here. Let's call this the feedback column, new feedback column, string column. So now that I've added this new column to my table, what we do with the ServiceNow IDE is we keep an eye on what's happening in your instance. And every once in a while, the IDE will kind of wake up and say, hey, I've noticed that some metadata on the instance has changed. We want your source code to be the source of truth for the state of your instance. And I didn't write this line. This wasn't here before. This showed up automatically as I made this change in the form builder here for my table. I created this feedback string column, and we've pulled this into my code automatically. I didn't have to write this. So one of the really cool things here is, let's say Patrick is working on the same application and he's doing so in our low code declarative tooling like table builder or from a form view. As he's making and saving those changes, we'll pull them into the source code here so that my source code is always up to date with the state of my instance, which is really, really cool. Some of the other cool stuff that comes as part of the IDE here is our ServiceNow Fluent language server. So if I'm trying to edit this business rule, I don't have to memorize exactly what the actions are that apply to a business rule. If I open up the quotes here, I'm given the options of delete, insert, and update. And I don't have to know this offhand. So if I want to add some actions on which this business rule runs, I can do that and add a delete. And if I type it wrong, I fat finger it and I put deleted, I get an error here saying delete is not assignable to this type. Did you mean delete? Yes, of course I did.
And Jay,
what's also,
if you add that error back, I just want to show something cool too. If you add that error back or create another error, like that's good. Yeah. And then if you go down to that errors tab on the bottom left, the far bottom left, yep, click that. So we surface all of your compilation errors and build errors here as well, so that you have a good kind of high level understanding of the ways that your app is broken before you even have to build it.
Oh, wow. It even suggests the right word.
That's right.
They're amazing.
And I can quick fix some of that stuff. So let's actually go ahead and add in one more parameter here. And
you only have one choice. It's insert.
That's right. So if I added my insert, I get all of this correct. I save my file. I run another build. I open up the business rule that I was working on down here. In my metadata explorer, that shows up in server development under business rules. I can open this business rule in the form view. And what I actually want to do is I want to split this right so that I can look at the business rule while I'm working on the code side by side, opens up right in the platform. And we see these new options that I added. And of course, this works both ways. If I uncheck the update and delete, and I just want to have this run on insert, and I go ahead and save this business rule, that same magic on line 49 here will happen when the IDE notices that the state of my instance has changed. I've removed those things from the definition of this business rule. It will go ahead and remove this from line 49 here. And it runs every so often, and we saw that that just happened. That stuff has been deleted out of my code. Now my code is the source of truth, which is awesome. So the next big question is, great, I've got this application. I've defined it in code. I'm happy with it, and I want to save it. I want to share it with Patrick. I want to take advantage of all of the really nice functionality for doing collaborative development with source control. And how do I do that? So we have the source control panel here, the source control extension. And the way that I can think about this is as if I were working locally on my desktop. When I initialize a repo, we call this kind of a local Git repo. It's local to the IDE here and the virtual file system on my instance. So when I initialize this repo for the Toolbox demo application, we'll call the default branch main as is customary. And I'll see all these untracked changes. Let's go ahead, track these changes that I've made. So now that they're staged, let's call it my first commit, and we'll make a commit to my repo.
Is this
Awesome.
to your, you said to the instance, is this to the instance or to your workspace specifically? Like where is this initialized? What level?
So Patrick, do you know that one?
Yeah, so the repo is initialized for the application that you've created. So you have your workspace that has a bunch of applications inside of it. Each one of those applications maps one-to-one with a Git repo. So in this case, it's mapped to only one of those apps that Jay created as part of this demo is actually going to get synchronized up into Git. You could then take that other app that Jay created and push it up to some other repo as well.
Jay, do we have the communication of who changed what back and forth when I'm looking at this right and left? If I'm on an instance and a value of a field changes, I get the little, heartbeat icon, and you hover over and it says, Jay changed the value of this field when you weren't looking. You're making changes on both sides. If I were to go into the code and change it to update, is it going to have the heartbeat? And likewise, how would I know if somebody changes something? I'm trying to figure out conflict management with two people doing the same thing or different things on the same file.
Yeah, Chuck. So my recommendation. Go ahead, Patrick. Sounds like you want to take that one.
Sorry to cut you off there. Yeah. So the I think one thing important kind of detail of how all these things come together is that for an application, like let's say you've got like two different users using the IDE at the same time on the same instance, and they both have the same scoped application checked out in the IDE. So maybe it's you and me. You and I are both on this IDE. We have it open in two different windows, two different user accounts. As you're making changes to files, I'm going to see those files propagate over into my workspace as well, because we're synchronizing our file system over the instance. So as you change files, I'm going to see the change that I've made. As I change files, I'll see the changes that you've made. If we're working on the same file at the same time, you save something and then I save something, we get a little merge window that pops up that prompts us to kind of merge our changes together. Whoever did the most recent save, it'll tell you kind of like normal VS Code, like, hey, the underlying files changed from what you have in open in the editor right now. What do you want to do about it? Do you want to wipe out the old changes? Do you want to take the new ones? Do you want to merge them? And on every build, and the reason for that is because we only ever run obviously one copy of the metadata at a time on the instance. We have a solution for that, which is a new platform feature called sandboxes that I'm sure this same audience would be really interested in. But assuming you don't have sandboxes, that's why we kind of keep or do our best to keep the code that you're working off of and the metadata records that you're viewing in the right there as in sync as we can. You won't get the heartbeat icon because the heartbeat icon is driven by AMB, so like a record watcher that's running on these forms, and the form is live updating with the changes. And currently, changes won't live update in the form. It's something that we're working on, kind of bringing back. So you won't see the heartbeat icon. You won't have a sense of like who's done what in that way. But the source code will always be updated and kept up to date with whatever the metadata is representing on the instance.
Okay, but if you're working in the code and somebody's off changing something on a form, it will change live or near live. Will you know who's doing that, or are you just going to say, "Hey, your action just changed from insert to insert and update"? Who did that? Why is it changing?
If it's the same underlying metadata, then you can always go to the application update file.
You can.
That's true.
Yeah, but we won't inline it in the IDE. I think it's an interesting concept, like some notion of like who's making what changes. It's something that we'll take back. And by the way, we love feedback for all of these tools, and we really want to understand how the community wants to use these tools, the things that folks think it's doing really well, the things that folks think that it could do better. We love to hear about it. Maybe a quick plug for reaching out to Jay and myself on LinkedIn or email or wherever else you like to reach people. We love feedback. We love talking to folks. So, that's my quick
plug. A live Git blame.
A live Git blame.
Absolutely. And I'll add to that, this is tooling by developers for developers. So as Patrick mentioned, we want to make sure that we're hitting all the use cases that folks are interested in using this tooling for. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I want to show one more thing before we actually push my changes to a repo. And within this business rule, we see that I'm referencing the show state update. And that's a script that I'm importing up here from server-script.js. And if I come down to my server folder, I can see this script.js here that I'm exporting. And this is the JavaScript that will run inside of that business rule. If I click the advanced button there and see the script editor, I can organize my code better this way by actually writing the JavaScript and exporting it and then importing it into the Fluent definition of, say, my business rule or client script, which is really, really cool. It's making use of this modular JS concept with import and export statements. So back to the source control point. Let's say I'm happy with my changes. I've built them. I've checked them out. I've saved everything. I've staged my changes. I've made my commit. And now I want to push to a repo. I've actually created on public GitHub here this empty repo. There's nothing in here. We've got this toolbox demo repo, and I want to push to that repo. So I can either use the command palette and call a git push, or I can click the three dots here in the source control extension and push to a repo. So the IDE is going to ask me, what's the URL of the repo to which you want to push? Well, it's my toolbox demo repo. And I'm going to get an error here because I haven't configured my Git credentials. So of course we can't push it to the repo. We haven't given access. So let's walk through configuring that quickly here. What I have to do is I have to create a Git credential. Let's call it Jay's GitHub threads. And this is going to go to my GitHub account, which is /Jay Couture. And I need to create an auth credential here. So for that auth credential, my username is going to be my GitHub username, and the password is going to be my personal access token. This will work for other Git providers as well. I'm just using GitHub as an example, so folks could use Bitbucket or GitLab and their equivalent of a personal access token.
Jay,
so
just up, we can't see the credentials.
The modal didn't appear.
Yeah, just so the audience, it's because it's a new window. I don't think it's getting shared. We could maybe talk over it. What you would see is a modal, like kind of a second window that pops up. I mean, it's if a reference field, so everyone's familiar with how that works, right, in ServiceNow. And it just prompted Jay to provide a username for his GitHub account and a personal access token that he generated for his GitHub account, which you can do through github.com or bitbucket.com or wherever. So that's all
right. And
there off screen.
I'll even kind of show this here. If I go to my settings in GitHub and I want to grab my personal access token, I come to personal access tokens, classic tokens. Let's create a new token. You folks will see it. Don't worry, I will generate a new one right after and delete this so that my personal access token is not recorded.
We could still use the privacy shrubbery.
This is for my toolbox demo, and I want to give it repo and admin permissions. So I'm generating this token. I already used that name. We'll just add some characters there, grab my access token, and then like Patrick was saying, if I click this little search icon, I get a little window that is not being shared, but it just gives me a screen to enter my username and password. And again, my username is my GitHub account, Jay Couture. My password is that personal access token. And that's how I create that credential. So once I've submitted that.
What is the value of the user field on this form if it's already in your credentials? Where it says user system administrator right below the auth credential field.
So this is my ServiceNow user. So I'm logged in as an administrator on my ServiceNow instance. If I were logged in as Jay, I had a user. Lots of our customers will do this. Folks will have their own user credits. They're not going to necessarily be logging in as admin, but it's a great note that the ServiceNow IDE does require the admin role because of all of the really powerful features to install kind of whatever you want on the instance. So once I created these creds, sorry, Chuck, did that answer your question?
Is that to say that only that user can use that credential, or just that that credential was created by or is owned by that user? Because right now I've got a GitHub credential as my personal access token in the credentials table. And when I'm in Studio, for example, I could say, here's the repo, here's the credential I want to use. There's no real ServiceNow user attached to that credential. Anybody on the instance who can get into Studio could use that credential.
And that's the same here. So if
Okay.
I wanted to set up, if I just wanted one credential record, just for maybe I have like one admin account on GitHub and I just want to use that for my whole team,
Yeah.
we can create credential record, like IDE login records mapped to my user, to your user, to whoever's user, but they all resolve to the same underlying credential. And that's totally okay. You can do that. Or if you want to have different credentials for everybody, maybe because you all have your own GitHub accounts, and you want everything to kind of like display, like be associated with the right GitHub user on the other side on the pull request or something, you can set it up that way as well.
I see what that enables. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a way for us to basically tie your default credentials to your user so that every time I come to the IDE, it knows that I am using my GitHub credentials so that when I make a commit and I push, that by default, I get to use those credentials. So I'm just going to come over here, copy
Chuck,
the repo.
It's why a lot of our repos still have AJB as part of the commit name.
Yes.
Because it all is the same credential from way back when. So thank you for adding that nuance.
So now that I've done a push from the three dots here and a push to this repo, when I refresh, we will see the exact representation of this application. This is not like just the XMLs. This is exactly everything that was in my IDE. We've got the metadata folder, the source folder. If I come to this Fluent folder and look at the index now TS, this is exactly that same ServiceNow Fluent that I was working on in my IDE. So now it's in my GitHub repo. I can go ahead and create a branch, J demo test 1, and I can start to make changes to this application on my branch, push up that branch, open a pull request, and follow sort of the normal Git workflow that I would in working collaboratively with a team all at the same time. So really enabling the use of kind of standard source control practices with bring your own source control provider of your choice and having this all work really nicely in the IDE. So the last thing that I want to cover here as kind of a transition to Patrick's demo is the use of third-party libraries. So I don't have a command line terminal as of right now in the IDE to do an npm install of something like Lodash or Moment. So all that I have to do is come into my package JSON for my application, which has some information about the application itself, the name, the version, the description. And if I go ahead and add dependencies here, I want to just add Moment, which is a common JavaScript utility package for doing date time calculations. And Moment.22.30.1 is the latest version here. And if I go ahead and save this package JSON, build up my application, and of course I would want to like import Moment and start to use it in my code. I'm actually not going to steal Patrick's thunder. I will let him go deeper into third-party libraries here. But when I package up this application through the build button, what we're actually going to do is go out to NPM. We're going to grab Moment and any of the other third-party library dependencies, and we're going to install it alongside my application so that I can use it. And this will live in the sys modules table. So we see right here, we downloaded the type definitions for Moment, we generated modules, and this is available in my application in the node modules folder. So I have Moment and all of its related code here that I can just grab pieces of, import all of that nice functionality. This works with Lodash and a lot of other really cool JavaScript utility libraries. So I don't have to write that code myself. I can use what's out there, state of the art, and start to kind of improve the productivity of actually working with JavaScript in my applications. So I think that's a good time to end the IDE demo and pass it over to Patrick to go into a demo of the ServiceNow Software Development Kit get a little bit deeper into Fluent, get a little bit deeper into JavaScript modules and third-party libraries.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jay. Yeah, so hey, everybody. So I want to show you a little bit of the ServiceNow SDK, which, of course, we've been looking at for a while now because Jay's entire demo is based on the ServiceNow SDK. What we've done on our side, though, is we've taken that build service that, every time Jay clicked that build button, what that's actually doing is it's invoking a utility called the Now SDK in our build system and running a build and generating this installable artifact that can be installed on a ServiceNow instance. And what we've done is we've taken all of that build tooling, that ServiceNow SDK utility that we're running, and we publish that to NPM so that you can use it on your own development machine too. If you've been following this stuff for a little while now, you'll know that back in January, we also shipped the ServiceNow SDK. That was the original release of the ServiceNow SDK, V1. That allowed you to define modular JavaScript, import third-party libraries. We have a great Creator Toolbox session that we did back in, I think, February or March that you can check out. But with the version 2 release, we shipped all sorts of new stuff too. So I'm going to show you a little bit of the ServiceNow SDK. We'll see kind of some of the same things that we saw in the IDE demo. We'll just see it through a different lens. We'll see it through my local development instead, using my own local copy of VS Code. And I'll show you some kind of cool new Fluent things as well. So let's get started by creating an application. So I'm just going to copy paste this because it's a big, long command that I want to run to create the exact app that I want to make. So what I'm doing here is I'm using the Now SDK, which is a utility that I downloaded off of NPM. I'm creating an app called XSNC Toolbox with some other flags that I'm passing in as well. Here I'm saying I want my app name to be Creator Toolbox. Not all of these commands are required. And yes, our documentation and the tool itself will explain each one of these commands. I'm giving it a package name. Here, I'm indicating that I actually want to create a sample table as part of this application as well. It's just a nice little way to get bootstrapped with the table right off the bat. And here, this is actually optional. I'm just passing it in to indicate that this project type that I want to create is a Fluent project, which is new to the 2.0 release. And we'll do Fluent projects in 2.0 by default. So I'll hit enter. Now what we're doing is we're bootstrapping new application. It's logging into an instance that I authenticated into through the Now SDK off screen. I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment as well. We're bootstrapping the app here. We're just doing all the same stuff that the IDE actually does when you create a new app through that. We're just doing it locally in my own command line environment here. So we're building the app. We're deploying the app into the instance that I've logged into. The deployment was successful, and it gives me a nice little link that I can go and navigate to see my shiny new app. So let's go check that out. Let's log in real quick. Here, I'm just authenticated into an instance running Xanadu. Oops. Here we go. Now let's take a look at that new application that we created. And here we go. So this is the new app I created, Creator Toolbox app. Down here, I can see all the application files and everything that were created as part of my new app. Right here, you can see that we've created a table as well called Toolbox To Do. But let's go and check out the source code for that app that got created. So if I type ls here, I'll clear everything out and type ls. We can see that I've created a bunch of files, but of course, I don't want to edit it through the terminal. Maybe not, of course. Maybe there's some Emacs or Vim heads out there. But in my case, I'd actually really like to use VS Code, so I'll do that. Here we go.
I would love to know the overlap of Emacs people and ServiceNow developers.
There's someone. I know there's got to be someone out there is stoked that they can finally do Emacs development for ServiceNow. And I guess if anyone wants an Emacs plugin for ServiceNow, let me know. I'd love to hear. Maybe there is huge latent demand for it. But here we go. So I've created my app, and now I can see it's the exact same application structure, which is really great, right? So this is all of the same stuff that we saw in the IDE. In fact, if I went to GitHub, maybe I went to the repository that that Jay created with his application. And if I wanted to clone that repo down into my local environment and just run local builds from here, that would totally work because it's all the same. It's the same stuff. It's the same Fluent code, same package JSON files. We just have two different ways that we can edit them, which is really awesome. So from here, let's dig into some things. So we've seen some of this before, right? We have this package.json file. This is where I'm defining things like the dependencies of my application. I have some handy little scripts set up for myself so I can really easily do builds and deploys and everything with npm script executions. And inside of this source folder up here, this is where I've got my Fluent code. Now, one really cool thing that I want to call out, and I'm calling it out because if you are intending to do Fluent development on your local machine, you will definitely want to make sure that you snag the ServiceNow Fluent extension from the VS Code Marketplace. It's a brand new extension that we've created to make it a little bit easier to edit these Fluent files. I'll show you how to get it. From VS Code, if you go over here to this extensions window, here I see all the different extensions that I run myself. I've got all sorts of cool stuff in here. And all the way at the bottom, I think, here we go. We have the ServiceNow Fluent language extension. Someone here could be the first one to give us a 5-star. I'm not saying, but
Way to beg, Patrick.
Are you refreshing this every 5 minutes? Waiting for
and through this extension, I mean, already we can see that, you know, if you don't download this extension, these files will be treated as regular TypeScript files. Because of course these are TypeScript files. These Fluent files are suffixed with .now.ts. That's because, as Jay mentioned, our Fluent language is a subset of the TypeScript language, but it's a special subset, hence the .now.ts that we add to the beginning. And if you download the VS Code extension for ServiceNow Fluent, which we include by default, of course, with the IDE, but that you'll have to install yourself on VS Code, then you get this great little ServiceNow icon that indicates that now this is not being treated as a TypeScript file. It is now being treated as a Fluent file. And the reason it's powerful is because I can do things like this. Like if this were just a regular TypeScript file, we would get pretty cool things like type safety. So as I'm typing into my entities here, we get this red squiggly that's going to tell me, hey, you know, it's going to surface a TypeScript error that says, hey, that foo property is not a part of client script. That's not one of the valid arguments. That's a TypeScript error, right? TypeScript errors are really powerful. They tell us a lot about the validity of the code that we're building, of course. Fluent does a little bit more, and Jay already kind of got to this, but one of the really cool benefits that you get if you download the VS Code extension is that we'll do additional safety checks, correctness checks that you don't get just through TypeScript. So for example, table names for a scoped application, they have to be prefixed with your scope, with your scope prefix. And if you don't, then we get all these errors. I actually get a few errors in this case. One of them is that my table definition needs to be exported as a named export with the name toolbox to do. So that's one change that I can make right there to get rid of some of these errors. But then I'll get more errors like, hey, the name property for this table, it has to start with a certain scope prefix. That's not a TypeScript error. That's a Fluent error. And this is happening because we're running the Now SDK as part of this extension and validating the work that we're doing. So every time that you make a change, we're passing that into the Now SDK, and that's going to tell us and tell VS Code whether or not something's broken. So I'll undo these changes again, and I'll get back into a good state. And here we go. So now I've got my index.now.ts file. It's got a lot of really cool stuff in it. And of course, if I open a terminal, I can build and deploy any changes that I'm making. So just as one example, let's open up this table real quick in the instance. So I'll go over here. I'll navigate to my table. I'll create a new to-do. I'll mark it as ready. Hello, world. Here we go. So now I've got a nice little toolbox to do. If I open this record, we'll see that we run a client script here, table loaded successfully. We can see where that client script's coming from. It's coming from right here. I've got this client script. Let's make a change to this real quick just to kind of prove that this end-to-end flow actually works. So right here in this client script, we have this cool little script tag that's indicating, hey, I want to write some inline JavaScript here. And I can say, hello Creator Toolbox. I'll save that. I'll do now SDK build and now SDK deploy. Build is, of course, going to build all of my changes locally. Deploy is going to push it onto the instance I've authenticated into. So let's run that. Real quick, I will take a question from Chuck. Is it more appropriate to say Fluent's a superset of TypeScript rather than a subset since it adds features? It's actually technically a subset of TypeScript. And the reason for that is because not everything that is valid TypeScript is valid Fluent. So Fluent is it's a declarative language for defining metadata. So what that means is that it's not an open-ended programming language. So what I can't do is for var I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus, do something.
Okay. Yeah.
Like if I tried to do something like this, I'm going to get an error here in just a second, I assume. There we go. For statements not allowed, and that's a Fluent error. So we do restrict the TypeScript features that you can use. And the additional functionality that Fluent adds is in the form of these entity definitions like client script and business rule and things like that. So technically, it's a subset. But I did want to call this out. Cool. So here we go. My deployment's completed. Let's come back over to my form here. If I refresh this form, hello, Creator Toolbox. So I can edit client scripts. I can edit UI actions, all sorts of other really cool things. So do I have time for showing just one more thing?
Yeah. Another quick question. You've got the business rule script imported. Can you do the similar thing? And where would it go for the client script? Because you've got client script is inline.
Right. So for client scripts right now, you could inline the script down here in the business rule as well if you wanted to. For client scripts, I believe there is a restriction currently where you'll have to inline the client scripts in this way. It is something that we're working on. We'd like to support module import declarations for client scripts the same way that we do for server-side script. There's some limitations that we have in actually enabling that right now and still getting a really clean output on the instance. So folks can give it a go. I think it might actually work. You might get something really weird on the instance, but I think it'll actually work. But in the case of client scripts, we recommend this script template tag here.
And if and when that comes, would I see that represented in the Explorer like at the same level as server? There might be a client.
Potentially. The interesting thing about this server folder is that it's actually you can name this whatever you want and configure it through, I believe it's your package.json file, or maybe it's now config. Or maybe I think it might just be defaulted to server actually. So you can if I wanted to name this server folder Chuck's server folder, that would totally work.
Okay.
So it's totally convention. And that's the thing about most of these folder names. The only non-convention folder is this generated folder. So now SDK, if you create new records, for example, on the instance and synchronize them back to your file system, it'll dump them by default into this generated folder.
Gotcha.
Everything else, so you can call the directories whatever you want. So let's do one last really cool thing. So I want to show just one more kind of advanced example of Fluent, and something I'm really excited about, which is Fluent support for scripted REST APIs. So to show that, I'm just going to create a new Fluent folder because we don't have to dump everything in index.now.ts. And I'll call it myapi.now.ts. So creating another Fluent file. You can create as many of these Fluent files as you want. You can put whatever you want inside of them, give them whatever names you want. And I'm going to copy paste some Fluent code from another window that I have that defines a REST API for me. And this is referencing a file that I haven't created over here yet. So I'll also create a myrestapi.js file inside this server here. myrestapi.js. I'll paste in some code into there. And maybe I'll even open it side by side here. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so now what I've done here is I've used Fluent to define a new REST API for me, and I am referencing this process function that I'm importing from this other regular JavaScript file over here that's just going to set the body of a message to hello world, and we're going to see that working here. So got my REST API. Let's run my build and deploy and actually see it on the instance real quick. What I love about this is that we're kind of getting at the ability to do sort of full stack application development with Fluent, which is really fun. Creating your tables, your REST APIs, your ACLs, everything else, you can do it all from Fluent. So now that that's built, I'll come over here back to my instance. I will go to $REST-API.do, our REST API Explorer. And here I will be able to see, if I scroll down, my Toolbox app, my little custom API. And if I hit my API, there we go. We can see that I'm logging my message back here. So one really common piece of feedback that we got when we shipped the V1 version of the SDK was, well, look, this is really great that I can define modular JavaScript. That's cool. It's a little frustrating, though, that I have to keep going back to the instance to use any of these modules that I'm defining. Like if I want to make a business rule or a scripted REST API or a scripted ACL or whatever, and I want to reference those JavaScript modules that I'm defining locally in VS Code, I got to flip back and forth from my instance back to VS Code, back to the instance, back to VS Code. It's kind of this weird hybrid development model. Folks wanted a solution to that. Fluent's the solution to that. So now you don't have to leave VS Code for many things. You'll still have to leave VS Code for some things. Workflows are a really probably popular example of one thing that's not supported in Fluent yet. You'll still need to edit those on the instance if they are part of your app that you're editing here. But for many things, you don't even have to leave VS Code. You can just define all of this stuff in code and reference your modules. And yeah, when I build apps now, much of the time, I don't even have to leave my editor, which is really awesome for me. And that's it. That's the demo. One thing that I don't think I have too much time to show, but that I'll just call out is that the same way that the Now SDK version 1 supported third-party libraries, we support third-party libraries here too, of course. If you want to know more about that, you can check out the SDK v1 Creator Toolbox that I did 6 months ago or so. Maybe we can post the link to that on this video, or I'll post a comment with that.
I'll put it
link
in the description.
Perfect. And all of that carries over, of course, here. It's not new. We're just continuing to support it. And the really new and exciting stuff is all this Fluent stuff. And that's the demo. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Yeah, I do have. I do have one question. Can you tell us what are upcoming like metadata types that are coming that will be supported by Fluent in the future? That's not already there.
Yes, I will. I will take the safe harbor question and talk about some of the stuff that is not there yet that we are hoping to get there shortly. So in terms of metadata types, we're looking to add what we call Fluent plugins or APIs for use with the ServiceNow Fluent language for Service Catalog and Service Portal. Those are kind of next on our list. Of course, metadata types for flows and UIB are very important as well. Those are maybe a little bit further out, but certainly things that we want to add to the list of things that you can define in Fluent. And along those lines, I want to be transparent as well about some of the other, I'll call them present limitations for the SDK and IDE, meaning things that don't work right now, but we're working on enabling. Number one, folks will notice that the ServiceNow IDE does not work in personal developer instances or PDIs as of right now. The reason for this is because we are running that Now SDK build service in the cloud, and that doesn't work with PDIs today. This is something that we're working on to enable the IDE to work in PDIs. It's very important to us so that folks can experiment with the IDE and get familiar with it, but want to call out that that is something that does not work today. That's noted on the store page. A couple of other big things as of right now, the IDE is for net new scoped applications. The SDK in its present form sort of works with converting your existing scoped applications to Fluent. You can certainly play with that, give us feedback. That's something that we're working on fuller support for, which will come in the not super distant future for the IDE, being able to take your existing scoped applications on your instance, converting them to Fluent applications and being able to work on them in the IDE. And then the two things that are kind of maybe a touch further out, not coming, in the very near future, but the certainly foreseeable future, are the ability to work on objects from global scope and global scoped applications, as well as app customizations for my kind of out of the box applications, as we call them. So in both the SDK and IDE, those are things that do not work today, but that we are working on. They are very important to us. So again, safe harbor around all of that. That's stuff that's not here today, but I want to give folks a very clear picture of what works, what doesn't, what we're working on. And I will again reiterate that Patrick and I are here. We're available. Reach out to us. Our email on LinkedIn, YouTube comments, Reddit, whatever forum you want. We're keeping an eye on it.
Smoke signal.
Right.
We'll find you.
We'll find you. We want this feedback. Synchronized swimming, maybe, whatever it takes. We'll collect that feedback. We're really interested in ensuring that we're enabling all of the use. Oh, the other last thing to mention in terms of compatibility is SSO authentication via OAuth 2. That's something that we're also working on. Today it's for basic creds with the SDK, and SSO for SSOing into your, or using an SSO provider with an identity provider for your Git accounts. That's something that we're working on as well. That doesn't work today, coming quite soon. So right. I think those are the big things I wanted to mention. I think it's very important that folks know what does and doesn't work.
It's a good roadmap. Also, for everybody watching, our typical audience for these shows, like a lot of our audience is ServiceNow admins, developers, analysts, admin, like a bunch of people that have no idea what they're looking at when they watch this video for this first time. Similar to last time we did the SDK, and that's okay. I think this is a great time for people to get started learning these traditional developer like processes, especially because with ServiceNow Fluent, it's a lot safer to do it. Like you saw some of the red squigglies that were happening. It's very safe to start playing around and know that like, oh, what I'm doing is not going to work, or I'm being presented with the right things to do. So it's a lot safer, especially with Patrick showed the example table. I think that's the parameter. Was it example table or demo table?
Yeah, sample table. Yeah,
sample table. So with sample table, it's going to bootstrap and architect some of those tables for you, put some nice scaffolding for you to play with and see how it's actually working. So there's just a lot of things that they're including that is making it easy for people that have never seen any of this stuff before, get really into learning how this stuff works, especially because I love working straight through my own editor. It's just so much, it's just nicer. Because I mean, Patrick scrolled through his plugins list. Like there's so many things that make it much easier for you to work with in your own editor. And then I'll plug too that come October, we're going to do Hacktoberfest again. And a lot of our stuff, we're going to try to shift over to utilizing some of our newer SDK stuff. And so a lot of that, hey, we're going to walk you through building your apps through just your editor without ever touching ServiceNow, but still affecting our production instances so that you can contribute to any of our integrations that we have with some of our community workspaces and stuff like that. So tune in for that, but now's a great time to get started.
Or if I could just bounce off of one thing you said there, just because it really resonates with me. So I truly believe that I think that anyone can code. I think that, I'm really excited. One of the things that I'm most excited about just professionally is making coding more accessible to more people. That's why we did the Now IDE and the Now SDK. We wanted something that was like useful for like the professional developers who don't need handholding and or don't, have all their own opinions that they already have about how development should work. And we wanted to give them a tool that they could plug into their existing workflows and their existing editors. We definitely wanted to do that. The reason we built the ServiceNow IDE is to bring this to more people. A really on Rails, like easy, simple, accessible way to get into coding. And I think what you'll see over time is that we'll bring more powerful features to power users, and we'll make the ServiceNow IDE simpler than ever and even easier for folks to jump into it and get started. Coding, I think, has a reputation as being this hard, like magical thing, like wizards casting incantations, and it totally doesn't have to be that way. Like, it should be accessible. It should be fun. It should be for everyone. And that's what the IDE is going to be for. And I'm really excited about that.
That's a perfect clip for us to share on social media to get people to this episode. So that's great. Thanks, Patrick. Okay.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Earl. We are at the top of the hour, and I learned a lot today. I don't know about the rest of you, but this was good stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Earl. This is a lot
of fun. Thanks, everyone.
Love being on the box.
We'll see you again next time. Everybody take
Thanks,
care.
everyone. Bye, everyone.